The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III stood at his office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the perfectly manicured gardens. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, showing a man who had waited decades to wear the crown that now rested heavily upon his shoulders. The weight of it seemed to grow heavier each day, especially when difficult decisions lay ahead. His private secretary knocked softly before entering the room. "Your Majesty, the Parker Bowles family has arrived for their appointment." Charles turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He had been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since Camilla had made her request. It wasn't the first time family politics had complicated royal life, but this situation felt particularly delicate. Camilla's brother Mark and her sister Annabelle waited in the blue drawing room, their faces bright with excitement and anticipation. They had dressed carefully for this occasion, understanding the importance of making a good impression. Mark adjusted his tie nervously while Annabelle smoothed her dress, both believing they were about to receive a warm welcome into the inner circle of royal life. The king made his way through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Palace staff bowed respectfully as he passed, but Charles barely noticed them. His mind was focused on the conversation ahead, one that would require all his diplomatic skills and emotional strength. He paused outside the drawing room door, taking a deep breath before entering. "Mark, Annabelle." Charles greeted them with a polite, but notably formal tone. The siblings rose immediately, offering respectful bows. They had expected warmth, perhaps even embraces, given their new family connection through Camilla. Instead, they found themselves facing a monarch who seemed to regard them as strangers rather than relatives. "Your Majesty," Mark began, his voice slightly nervous but eager. "We wanted to thank you for agreeing to see us. Camilla mentioned that we might discuss ways we could support the royal family, perhaps take on some smaller engagements or charitable work." Charles remained standing while his guests sat, a subtle but clear indication of the formal nature of this meeting. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he replied carefully, "but I must be frank with you both. The royal family operates under very specific protocols and traditions that have been established over centuries." Annabelle leaned forward slightly, her hope still evident. "We understand completely, Your Majesty. We're prepared to learn whatever is necessary. We simply want to be helpful to Camilla and to you." The king walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, tourists gathered at the palace gates, cameras ready to capture any glimpse of royal life. He thought about how every action, every decision he made, would be scrutinized and analyzed by the press and public alike. The monarchy had survived scandals and controversies before, but it had done so by maintaining strict boundaries and careful control over its image. "The truth is," Charles continued, turning back to face them, "the working royal family must remain small and focused. Every addition brings complexity, security concerns, and public scrutiny that extends far beyond what most people can imagine." His words were measured and diplomatic, but the underlying message was becoming clear. Mark's expression began to change as he realized the direction of the conversation. "Are you saying there's no place for us in any official capacity?" he asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. Charles sat down across from them, his posture remaining formal despite the family connection. "What I'm saying is that the institution of the monarchy requires very careful consideration of every decision. While you are, of course, family through Camilla, that doesn't automatically translate to public roles or official duties." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Annabelle looked at her brother, then back at the king. "We had hoped. Camilla led us to believe that there might be opportunities to contribute meaningfully." "Camilla has a generous heart," Charles replied, his voice softening slightly when he mentioned his wife. "But even she must understand that the crown comes with responsibilities that sometimes require difficult choices. The British people expect their royal family to embody certain standards and traditions." Mark stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. "Are you suggesting we're not suitable for those standards?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, though he immediately regretted his tone when speaking to the monarch. Charles remained calm, though his eyes showed a flash of steel. "I'm not making judgments about your character or worth as individuals. I'm explaining the realities of constitutional monarchy in the 21st century. Every decision must be made with the long-term stability and reputation of the crown in mind. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome had been determined from the moment Charles entered the room. Despite their pleas and Camilla's earlier advocacy on their behalf, the Parker Bowles siblings found themselves politely but firmly excluded from any meaningful role in royal life. As they prepared to leave, Annabelle made one final attempt. Could we perhaps start with something very small? Charity work that wouldn't require any official recognition or titles? Her voice carried the desperation of someone watching an opportunity slip away. Charles walked them to the door personally, a gesture that softened the blow slightly, but didn't change the decision. I encourage you both to continue your charitable interests as private citizens. That work has its own value and importance, regardless of any royal connection. After they left, the king returned to his office and sat heavily in his chair. Through his window, he could see the Parker Bowles car disappearing through the palace gates. He knew this decision would have consequences beyond the immediate disappointment of Camilla's relatives. The real challenge would come when he faced his wife. That evening, Camilla found him in his study, surrounded by state papers and correspondence. She entered quietly, her face already showing she had heard about the meeting. "They called me," she said simply. Settling into the chair across from his desk, Charles looked up from his papers, meeting her eyes directly. "I know this wasn't the outcome you hoped for," he began, but Camilla raised her hand to stop him. "You don't need to explain yourself to me, Charles. I understand the position you're in." Her voice was calm, but he could detect the underlying strain. "I just wish there had been some way to find a middle ground." The king set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Every decision I make sets a precedent. If I make exceptions for your family, how do I justify excluding others in the future? The monarchy survives by maintaining consistency in its standards and protocols." Camilla nodded slowly, understanding the logic even if she didn't like the result. "I know you're right. It doesn't make it any easier to explain to them, but I know you're right." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "They're good people, Charles. They would have served well." "I don't doubt that," he replied quietly. "But being good people isn't always enough in this position." After she left, Charles remained in his study long into the night, reviewing documents and preparing for the next day's meetings. But his mind kept returning to the faces of Mark and Annabelle Parker Bowles, their hope gradually replaced by disappointment and confusion. He wondered if he had been too harsh, too inflexible in his interpretation of royal protocol. Outside his windows, London continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the family drama playing out within the palace walls. The king had made his decision, maintaining the boundaries he believed necessary for the monarchy's survival. But as he would soon discover, some decisions create ripples that extend far beyond their immediate impact, touching relationships and loyalties in ways that couldn't be fully anticipated. The days following the meeting with the Parker Bowles siblings brought an unusual quiet to the royal household. Staff members noticed the change immediately, though none dared to comment openly. Conversations between the king and queen consort became shorter, more formal, as if they were walking carefully around an invisible wound that neither wanted to aggravate. Camilla threw herself into her scheduled engagements with renewed intensity. She opened a new literacy center in Manchester, attended a garden party for military families, and hosted a reception for domestic violence survivors. To outside observers, she appeared as dedicated and graceful as ever, but those who worked closely with her noticed the subtle changes. Her smiles seemed more practiced, her laughter less spontaneous. During a quiet moment between appointments, her lady-in-waiting ventured a gentle inquiry about her well-being. "Your Majesty, you seem particularly focused lately. I hope everything is well with the family." Camilla paused in reviewing her next day's schedule and looked up with tired eyes. "Family can be complicated, can't it?" she replied, her voice carrying a weight that extended far beyond the simple question. "Sometimes the people we love most are the ones we disappoint most deeply, even when we're trying to do what's right." Meanwhile, Charles maintained his usual routine of state business and royal duties, but palace insiders noticed his increased attention to protocol matters. He spent hours in meetings with his private secretary, reviewing guidelines for royal family participation, and discussing precedents from previous reigns. It was as if he was seeking validation for his decision through historical research and constitutional study. The Archbishop of Canterbury visited for their monthly discussion about church matters, but found the king unusually distracted. "Your Majesty seems burdened by something beyond our usual concerns," the Archbishop observed during a break in their conversation. Charles stood by his office window, watching gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. "Have you ever had to choose between being a good husband and being a good king?" he asked without turning around. The question surprised the Archbishop, who had rarely seen the monarch express such personal uncertainty. "The roles often conflict," the Archbishop replied thoughtfully. "But perhaps the question isn't about choosing between them, but finding ways to honor both responsibilities while staying true to your deepest principles." At the same time, Mark and Annabel Parker Bowles were struggling with their own disappointment in their respective homes. Mark found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about royal life and family loyalty. He had imagined that marriage to the king would bring opportunities for Camilla's family to contribute meaningfully to royal work, but instead found themselves more distant than ever. His wife Sarah listened patiently as he recounted the meeting for the dozenth time. "I keep wondering if we did something wrong. Said something inappropriate," he mused, pacing their living room. "The way he looked at us, like we were somehow unsuitable or unworthy." "Maybe it wasn't about us personally," Sarah suggested gently. "Maybe it was about something bigger than any of us could control." But Mark struggled to accept that explanation, feeling personally rejected by someone who was supposed to be family. Annabel faced similar struggles, finding it difficult to explain to friends who had been excited about her royal connection. When asked about possible future roles or access to royal events, she found herself making vague excuses and changing the subject. The social embarrassment added another layer to her disappointment. The media, always alert to royal family dynamics, began to notice subtle changes in public appearances. Royal watchers commented on the formal distance between Charles and Camilla during joint engagements, noting that their usual warm interactions seemed more restrained. Tabloid headlines began speculating about tension in the royal marriage and family disagreements behind palace doors. Palace communications staff worked overtime to manage the narrative, issuing statements about the royal couple's strong partnership and shared commitment to their duties. But experienced royal correspondents sensed there was more to the story than official statements revealed. During a state dinner for visiting diplomats, the strain became more visible. Camilla, usually gracious and engaging with guests, seemed distant and preoccupied. Charles, typically confident in his role as host, appeared to be going through the motions rather than genuinely connecting with their visitors. Several ambassadors later commented privately about the unusual atmosphere. The breaking point came during a family gathering at Sandringham. Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived with their children for what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, but found themselves witnessing an uncomfortable family dynamic. The children, sensitive to adult emotions, became unusually quiet and clingy. During a private walk through the estate grounds, William approached his father directly. "Dad, what's going on with you and Camilla?" Everyone can feel the tension, and it's affecting the whole family atmosphere. Charles stopped walking and looked across the familiar landscape where he had spent so much of his childhood. "Sometimes being king requires making decisions that hurt the people you love most," he said quietly. "I turned away Camilla's brother and sister when they asked for roles in royal life." She understood the reasoning, but understanding and accepting are different things. William absorbed this information carefully. As heir to the throne, he was already thinking about how such decisions would affect him in the future. Was there really no way to find some compromise? Something that would have honored family connections while maintaining royal standards? "I've asked myself that question every day since," Charles admitted. "But once you start making exceptions based on personal relationships, where does it end? How do you maintain the institution while accommodating everyone's feelings and expectations?" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's laughter from the house, a reminder of the family life they were all trying to protect and preserve. As they walked back, both men were lost in thought about the complex balance between duty and personal relationships that defines royal life. That evening, during dinner with the extended family, Camilla made a pointed comment about loyalty and support that everyone understood was directed at Charles. Though she maintained perfect politeness throughout, Charles responded with equal formality, discussing constitutional matters in a way that emphasized his ultimate responsibility for royal family decisions. The other family members found themselves caught in an uncomfortable middle ground, unsure how to navigate the subtle conflict playing out before them. Catherine tried to lighten the mood with stories about the children's recent school activities, while William steered conversation toward neutral topics like estate management and charitable work. Later that night, Charles found himself alone in his study, reviewing papers but unable to concentrate. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sound of footsteps in distant corridors. He thought about his mother, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had navigated similar family challenges throughout her long reign. She had always maintained that duty came first, but she had also shown remarkable skill in balancing institutional needs with family relationships. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Camilla entered wearing her dressing gown, her expression serious, but not hostile. "We need to talk," she said simply, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for invitation. "I know," Charles replied, setting aside his papers completely. "I've been dreading this conversation, but I know we need to have it." What followed was their most honest discussion since the difficult decision about her siblings. They talked through the night, exploring not just the immediate situation but the broader challenges of their unique position. By dawn, they had reached a better understanding, though the fundamental issues remained unresolved. The quiet that had settled over the palace would continue, but it would carry different meanings for different people, as the consequences of royal decisions continued to unfold. 6 months had passed since the fateful meeting with the Parker Bowles siblings, and the royal household had settled into a new rhythm. The initial tension had evolved into something more complex, a quiet understanding mixed with lingering regret that colored many family interactions. Charles had learned to live with his decision, though it continued to weigh on his conscience during quiet moments. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a visit to a homeless shelter in Birmingham. Camilla was there in her official capacity, meeting with volunteers and clients, when she encountered a familiar face among the workers. Mark Parker Bowles was serving meals, wearing a simple apron over casual clothes, his attention focused entirely on the people he was helping. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, both siblings felt the awkwardness of their changed relationship. But Mark's expression quickly shifted to one of genuine warmth as he approached his sister. "Camilla," he said simply, embracing her naturally despite the formal setting, and watching eyes of her security detail. "Mark, I had no idea you were volunteering here," she replied, her voice carrying both surprise and pleasure at seeing him engaged in meaningful work. Around them, shelter clients and volunteers continued their activities, treating the interaction as a normal family moment rather than a royal encounter. "After our meeting with Charles," Mark explained quietly, "I realized I was focusing on the wrong things. I wanted recognition and official roles, but the work itself, helping people who really need it, that's what actually matters." He gestured around the shelter, where dozens of volunteers were serving meals and providing support without any expectation of recognition or reward. Camilla spent the next hour observing her brother's work, seeing how naturally he connected with the shelter clients and how much respect he had earned from fellow volunteers. The shelter director mentioned that Mark had been there every week for months, gradually taking on more responsibility and helping to organize new programs. That evening, Camilla shared the encounter with Charles during their private dinner. For the first time in months, she spoke about her brother with unqualified pride and enthusiasm. "He's found something real, Charles, something that matters to him personally rather than just being an extension of our family connection." Charles listened thoughtfully, recognizing something important in his wife's changed tone. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "there might be ways for the royal family to support the work he's doing without creating the complications we were worried about before." This conversation marked the beginning of a gradual reconciliation process that would unfold over the following months. Charles began to see possibilities he had previously overlooked, ways to acknowledge and support family members' charitable work without granting them official royal roles or titles. The king arranged for a private meeting with Mark at the Birmingham shelter, arriving without fanfare or media attention. He spent 2 hours observing the programs, talking with staff and clients, and seeing firsthand the impact of the work being done. Mark made no requests for recognition or support, focusing entirely on explaining the shelter's needs and challenges. "This is impressive work," Charles told Mark as they concluded their visit. "Important work that deserves support." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps there are ways the royal family can help amplify these efforts without compromising the principles we discussed before." Over the following weeks, a careful plan emerged. The shelter would receive a significant private donation from the King's personal charitable fund, but without any public announcement linking it to the Parker Bowles connection. Mark would continue his volunteer work as a private citizen, but his efforts would occasionally be highlighted in broader royal communications about community service and volunteerism. Annabelle found her own path through a different route. Her experience with disappointment had led her to examine her motivations more deeply, and she discovered a genuine passion for supporting military families. She began working with a veteran support organization, initially as a way to channel her energy positively, but gradually becoming deeply committed to the cause. When Charles learned about Annabelle's work, he was impressed by her dedication and effectiveness. Like her brother, she had found meaningful work that stood on its own merits rather than depending on royal connections. This opened possibilities for similar quiet support that could benefit the causes she cared about without creating the protocol complications he had worried about. The real test of these new arrangements came during a major royal event, the annual garden party at Buckingham Palace. In previous years, the Parker Bowles siblings might have expected invitations as family members, creating awkward questions about their status and role. This year, they were invited as representatives of the charitable organizations they supported, attending in their capacity as committed volunteers rather than as royal relatives. Mark attended with the shelter director and several other volunteers, wearing his organization's t-shirt rather than formal attire. Annabelle came with a group from the Veteran Support Charity, focusing entirely on introducing Charles and Camilla to the military families they served. Both siblings seemed comfortable and genuine in these roles, more relaxed than they had been during their formal meeting months earlier. The garden party provided an opportunity for natural family interactions without the pressure of official roles or public scrutiny. Charles found himself genuinely enjoying conversations with both Mark and Annabelle about their work, seeing them as effective advocates for important causes rather than as problems to be managed. Palace staff noted the change in atmosphere immediately. The formal tension that had characterized royal family interactions for months began to ease, replaced by something more natural and sustainable. Camilla seemed more relaxed and spontaneous in her public engagements, while Charles appeared more confident in his family decisions. The media, always alert to royal family dynamics, noticed the positive change but struggled to identify its specific causes. Royal correspondents reported on improved family relationships and successful charitable initiatives, but without the full context of the earlier tensions and their gradual resolution. During a quiet evening at Clarence House, Charles and Camilla reflected on how the situation had evolved. "I think we all learned something important," Camilla observed, "about the difference between wanting recognition and wanting to make a real difference." Charles nodded, setting aside the state papers he had been reviewing. "Your brother and sister found something more valuable than what they initially asked for. They found work that gives them genuine satisfaction and purpose, independent of any royal connection." The conversation turned to broader questions about royal family relationships and responsibilities. They discussed how to maintain appropriate boundaries while still supporting family members' individual contributions to society. It was a delicate balance, but one they felt more confident about navigating after their recent experiences. A year later, both Mark and Annabelle had become recognized leaders in their respective charitable sectors. Mark had helped establish 3 new support programs for homeless individuals, while Annabelle had developed innovative approaches to helping military families transition to civilian life. Their work earned respect and recognition based on its merits, creating the kind of meaningful impact they had originally hoped to achieve through royal roles. The quiet that had once echoed through the palace after Charles turned away, Camilla's relatives had transformed into something different. A peaceful understanding that family relationships could be maintained and honored in ways that served everyone's best interests. The king had learned that saying no to one request could open doors to more authentic and sustainable forms of support and recognition. Charles often thought about that difficult day and the conversation that had seemed to close doors permanently. In reality, it had opened different doors, ones that led to more genuine satisfaction for everyone involved. The monarchy had maintained its institutional integrity while finding ways to honor family connections and support meaningful work. The lesson extended beyond the immediate family situation, influencing how Charles approached other complex decisions about royal roles and responsibilities. He had discovered that firm boundaries, while initially painful, could ultimately create space for more authentic and lasting relationships. As he stood once again at his office window, watching the palace gardens where groundskeepers continued their careful work, Charles reflected on the unexpected wisdom that had emerged from a difficult family situation. Sometimes the most loving thing a king could do was to say no to immediate requests, while remaining open to possibilities that served everyone's deeper needs and values.